Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Dubai, and these are the stories that set your agenda. Edging lower, Asian stocks slip as China's economy falters, with factory activity shrinking for a fourth straight month. Israel braces for a nationwide labor strike, while hundreds of thousands rally to demand a ceasefire deal after the bodies of 6 hostages were found in Gaza. Plus, a blow for Scholz, Germany's far right, set to win a regional election for the first time since World War II, as the ruling coalition is punished in the East. Well, happy Monday, everybody. It is a bank holiday in the U.S., so bear in mind that some of the trading activity will be lighter levels than usual, perhaps lower volumes. But we did have a big build-up on Friday, that PCE number widely anticipated coming in line with expectations. And if anything, the year-on-year core PCE print slightly lower than what the market had penciled in. That propelled the S&P and NASDAQ to more highs, up 1% by the close. Today, you can see the futures are leaning towards negative. We got S&P futures down about 0.2%, the Nasdaq down another 0.2% as well. As we look forward to even more data coming out this week, a lot of emphasis is going to be on the jobs data. The NFP number is coming out on Friday. Over in Europe, you can see the Euro Stoxx futures trading sideways. The FTSE 100 leading the charge, up about 0.3%. The euro flat, despite some of the news coming through from Germany. We're going to talk more about that, but we have seen a big surge in popularity for the far right and also some of the populist far left parties in the state elections. Not a meaningful reaction yet on the currency, as you can see, trading sideways. The pound also slipping a little bit versus the USD. 131.25 is where we're at. And then Brent cannot keep a bid, down 0.8%, sitting at around $76 here. This as the energy complex takes into consideration the weakness of the global economy, some of the signs coming through from China, in addition to the prospect of OPEC Plus putting back more barrels to the market. So to talk more about some of those signals that we're getting through from China and more broadly from the Chinese economy, let's talk about how Asian markets are faring with Avril Hong in Singapore and the reaction we've had in these markets to the data that's come through. Avril.
It's been a really negative reaction, Jumana. I mean, we saw the CSI 300 on Friday clocking gains. That didn't last at all. Over the weekend, we got numbers on factory activity, a deepening contraction, and then some of these new home sales also showing the picture worsening. And then add to that, we also got some numbers out of Vanke. This is a company that's seen as a bellwether for the real estate crisis in China. It posted a loss. I think this is the first time in like 20 years. So all in, nothing looks to be happening the way China wants it to. Clearly, this real estate crisis is still reeling through the economy and market sentiment is taking a hit. It seems to also be spreading to other parts of Asia in a way, I guess, or not helping to lift sentiment. We're seeing the Japanese equities actually erasing gains of 1+% from earlier on in the session. We have a bit of a firming in the Japanese currency, but note this is coming despite the Japan corporate profit growth coming in above consensus. So it gives you a sense of how weak sentiment is overall. Of course, there's also the idea that given how things seem to be looking quite upbeat in Japan, that could heighten expectations of a BOJ rate hike. So there's something else to consider. Now, if you're wondering why we're seeing some green on the Kospi, let's flip the board and take a closer look at some of the stocks in focus. We had Morgan Stanley upgrading some of the EV battery stocks in South Korea, as this is, they say, some potential catalyst coming through eventually, as you know, we look to those EU carbon emissions targets. So the battery makers are the ones that are helping to offset things on a day where it's looking really negative. And then you throw in geopolitics into the mix. In the past hour, we got a Bloomberg scoop, and they cited people familiar with the matter saying that China has threatened retaliation on Japan if it ramps up chip curbs. And we saw the Tokyo Electron Laser Tech, these are the Japan chip stocks, turning tail after that bit of information. Jumana.
Avril? Thank you so much. Some important context there for some of the price action that we're seeing. All right, let's go back to the U.S. data that we got on Friday. Underlying U.S. inflation released on Friday afternoon rose 0.2% last month, reinforcing the Fed's plan to start cutting rates next month. Let's get more with Bloomberg MLive strategist Mark Cranfield. Well, the numbers are pretty much in line, Mark. Perhaps if we want to be really specific, that core year-on-year number slightly lower than expectations. But how are traders taking this data?
Well, traders will see it as another sign that the soft landing is heading that way, that the Fed is on a path towards lowering interest rates, but probably only by a small amount in September. When they look at that PCE specifically, they'll be watching the 3-month annualized numbers, which is what the Fed watches, and that came down to 1.7%. So actually slightly below 2%, which is this threshold that the Fed has been very keen to see inflation reach. So overall, the picture is good. The Fed can go ahead and do what they want to do. There's nothing in that PCE that will dissuade them that there's anything wrong, that they've got their forecast right. So traders from that point of view, they pull back slightly in the Treasury market, but that may also be affected by the long weekend as well. So you see a little bit of position churning. But overall, people will be reasonably comfortable that what they saw in that would lead them to expect the Fed to at least start lowering interest rates, even if they don't give us a clear signal on how far they're going to cut rates over the next year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you talk about one of those clear signals, we've got other very important data coming up this week, the labor market data, NFPs on Friday. How will that data feed into the market's expectations of what the Fed do in September?
This is probably the last chance if traders are looking for a bigger interest rate cut of 50 basis points rather than a 25 basis points. The unemployment rate this Friday is probably the one that would decide that. If we get a shock, if we get a big jump in the unemployment rate itself, that will still open the door for the potential for a larger rate cut. That's not the expectations from Bloomberg Economics. They think that the unemployment rate will rise to 4.34% from 4.3% in the last month. So that's not really enough. That still looks like a soft landing scenario. There is one more inflation report to come before the Fed meets. But again, the expectations we have so far is it will largely be in line with the previous month. So on the data front, only a really big surprise is what traders would jump on if they're looking for a larger rate cut. Everything for now suggests that 25 basis points is what we're going to get later this month. Now, whether that's enough to satisfy equity markets who really have been going all guns blazing since they rebounded from the lows in August, maybe not enough. There could be some disappointment. The Fed actually could push back a little bit, trying to cool people down, because if you look at the derivatives curve, it's suggesting 200 basis points worth of interest rate cuts over the next 18 months. That's probably too much from the Fed's point of view, and they may dampen expectations when they meet later this month.
Yeah, big one. Certainly, there are going to be a lot of eyes on that data on Friday, as ever. Bloomberg MLive strategist Mark Cranfield. Well, talking about some of the big events that are coming up this week, in addition to the NFP, maybe let's just start with the manufacturing PMI data that comes out today in the UK. You want to keep a close eye on that. Some of the signals coming through have been positive in the last few months. So keep an eye out for that. And then Tuesday, to build up on the manufacturing PMIs, we're getting US manufacturing PMI data. So keep an eye for that again, another sign that would reflect the health of the U.S. economy. And the recent signals from U.S. manufacturing perspective have been a little bit weak. So it will be interesting to see whether this number also follows the same trajectory that we've seen the last few months. And then the big event, of course, is going to be on Friday with those NFP numbers. The day before, we get the private numbers, the ADP, but the big focus will be NFP and also not just the headline figure. As you can see, it's shown there and has been drifting lower and lower, but also on that unemployment rate, which has been ticking higher too. So plenty to watch out for this week. And you can get a roundup of all the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. The terminal subscribers can go to day/BGO. So you can take a look if you just type that into your terminal today. Of course, we're leading with some of the news coming out of Germany this morning. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But a new week and a possible new prime minister for France as President Macron meets with some of the candidates today. We'll bring you the details next. This is Bloomberg. Israel's largest labor group is poised for a nationwide strike today. It is the strongest push yet to force Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government into a ceasefire deal in Gaza. This after large protests over the weekend following the discovery of the bodies of 6 hostages in a tunnel in the Gaza Strip. We're now joined by Paul Wallace, our economy and government team, from our economy and government team covering the Middle East. Paul, just bring us up to speed on the scale of these demonstrations and what the demonstrators are protesting against.
So what you saw yesterday from around the afternoon onwards and into the evening, some of the footage just on screen there, were some of the biggest protests we've seen really since October the 7th. These were people reacting to the news that these 6 hostages had been killed. According to Israeli analysis, they were executed only a short while before their bodies were discovered. And these are really people taking to the streets of Tel Aviv and other cities in Israel demanding a ceasefire. In many ways, they're sort of anti-government protests, or at least they're protesting against the government stance on the ceasefire talks. We're yet to see how big this strike is today. Not all members of the unions will take part, and the government is trying to block them from doing that, saying that this is an illegal strike. So we're yet to see how big that is and whether things like Ben Gurion Airport shuts down. But certainly it seems pretty significant.
Well, how likely are these demonstrations to move the needle on these ceasefire discussions? And again, we've been talking about this for weeks on end now. A lot of daylight still between the two sides, but there is a lot of pressure on Netanyahu to come to a deal to secure the release of the outstanding hostages. How likely is it that public pressure is actually going to force Netanyahu's hand?
It's a very good question, and I think what happened yesterday with the discovery of the bodies is going to turn into a turning point. It just depends on how big a turning point that is, and I think what will determine that is what happens on the street in Israel. If the political pressure is big enough, that's probably something that will move Netanyahu closer towards accepting a ceasefire deal and getting one across the line. The failure, or if you like, the unwillingness to do so far is causing a lot of strain within Israeli society, within the cabinet itself. Of course, the government is blaming Hamas, but certainly what happened yesterday was a significant piece of move, and it's certainly something that could get the government closer to accepting a ceasefire deal.
Yeah, most certainly. Bloomberg's Paul Wallace, thank you for joining us with the latest out of Israel. Staying in the region, the UK Maritime Trade Operations says it has received a report of an incident 70 miles northwest of Salif in Yemen. Authorities say they're currently investigating. We'll bring you more details as we get them. And a polio vaccine campaign for children has begun in the Gaza Strip just weeks after a 10-month-old baby was diagnosed with the paralyzing disease. Israel has agreed to partial pauses in the fighting to allow for vaccinations. The vaccination drive, led by United Nations agencies, aims to reach more than 6,000 children. And over in Europe, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's ruling coalition is set for a landslide defeat in regional elections, as populist parties on the extreme right and the left taking more than 60% of the vote. Let's get more with Bloomberg's Oliver Crook. Oliver, just walk us through some of the results that came through over the course of this weekend, because it seemed like it was a very victorious weekend for some of these populist parties. All right. It looks like we are having some technical issues with Oliver Crook. Big story over in Germany. We will get back to that story in a short while. But another major story that we're watching very closely in the region as well is in France. The French President Emmanuel Macron is set to hold talks with senior political figures as he prepares to name a new prime minister. He'll meet with former socialist Bernard Cazeneuve and also plans discussions with conservative Xavier Bertrand today. So joining me now is Douglas Yates, professor and political analyst at the American Graduate School in Paris. Good morning to you, sir. Maybe let's just start off talking about how long it has taken for the president to select his PM candidate. Many on the left are actually criticizing Macron, saying that he's interfering too much in the democratic process. What is your take?
Well, if the democratic process had been really respected, you would have populists in power. Jordan Bardella would be prime minister, and Marine Le Pen would be in the background, like one of the evil witches flying crows. So the democratic process has been tampered with brilliantly by Macron. He called elections in June. He lost them, but he counted on strategically a Republican front that worked perfectly. So the National Front, the Rassemblement National, as it calls itself, is number 3, and Jordan Bardella is not going to be prime minister. But then that left Macron with a problem. To whom does he give power? He would have preferred to work with the center-right party, Les Républicains. You might remember them as the Sarkozyists. But Laurent Wauquiez, who's the head of that party, doesn't want to give any ammunition to Macron, because Wauquiez wants to present himself in 2027 for president. So that left Macron having to work with the left. But on the left was his worst enemy, Jean-Luc Mélenchon of the extreme left. And Macron couldn't accept that. It took them months to find a common candidate, Lucie Castex, and Macron refused her. And so all that leaves him with his ensemble, his sort of center party, is to work with center left. And there he finds himself with his old friend, François Hollande. You might remember Macron was a minister under François Hollande.
Of course.
And with the mayor of Paris and Hidalgo, who everyone saw during the Olympics. And these centrist socialists are sort of the only respectable, frequentable partners who are willing to work with him. And that's where we get Cazeneuve. It's taken 2 months, but frankly, from Macron's point of view, no problem.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of those French sayings. They say, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. With all of the changes,
Yes.
You're going back to the same people with the potential selection of Hollande. But if he does do that, what are the chances of a no-confidence vote coming through? Not necessarily for Hollande himself, but for any single one of the candidates he picks.
Well, in the theory of what he's been doing with consultations of the right and the left, he has presented his strategy as this. He knows that nobody has a majority, but if he can choose someone who can survive a vote of no confidence, then he's chosen someone who can do the budget. And the theory is that Cazeneuve can work with the left, can work with the right. He is a former socialist, and he said, I'm not going to become a prime minister of the right. And he is also willing to work with Macron. The two actually have a long history working together as ministers in the same government. But effectively choosing Cazeneuve is a problem for Macron because he won't be trampled over. He's got his own views, and he used to be in the hierarchy above Macron, when Macron was just an assistant general secretary in the Élysée. And Cazeneuve was already European minister, budget minister, and then interior minister.
Can I just ask you how you see French politics evolving over the next year? It appears as though the left is fragmented, the center is fragmented, the right is fragmented, and yet they have to put a government together because there's a budget deadline coming up. How do you see this all panning out over the course of the next year? And do you see a real possibility of yet another round of snap elections?
He can't call anything for 1 year after the last snap election. So there is a constitutional limit on him being able to call another election. So the group that we have now in Parliament, in the National Assembly, are the group that we're going to deal with over the year. Cazeneuve was a budget minister. He's someone who knows how to negotiate, and he's not entirely opposed to some of the fundamental reforms of Macron. Things like the environmental transition, just for example, parental leave reforms, budget cuts to welfare, New Caledonia, France's Pacific colony that's rebelling, euthanasia reforms, organized crime reforms. So he's on board with quite a bit, and he might negotiate a position that Macron will be satisfied with. The only question is, can he build a majority in Parliament? That majority would require not only that he has the support of the new Popular Front, but that he has the support of Macron's ensemble. If the new Popular Front doesn't go with him, the Republicans, Les Républicains, have already indicated there'll be a veto in the assembly because they don't want to give Macron a success. So I'd expect the budget to pass in the end, but with real opposition, and it will be a brutal political battle as people position themselves for the presidential elections in 2027.
Yeah, and also it's being reflected in where French assets are trading. Let's not forget about that as well. Douglas Yates, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. Douglas Yates, professor and political analyst at the American Graduate School in Paris. Well, let's go back to the story we were talking about in Germany, because we've also had some developments out of Germany over the weekend. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's ruling coalition is set for a landslide defeat in regional elections as populist parties on the extreme right and the left taking more than 60% of the vote. Let's get more with Bloomberg's Oliver Crook. So, Oliver, just bring us up to speed with what happened. It was a victory for the far right and even for the far left, less so, of course, for the Chancellor.
Yeah, Jemima, there's so many angles to sort of approach this story from, but really what you saw was the sort of center really collapsing, particularly for the coalition ruling government of Germany right now. And the biggest winner really so far has been the AfD, particularly in Thuringia, where they actually won the greatest number of seats. And this is significant, Jemima, because this is obviously a far-right group. And some of the chapters in Thuringia and Saxony, the ones that were on the ballot, have been designated by the German intelligence services as extremist political groups. And this is the first time that they've come out on top and getting a region within Germany. So it's significant from that perspective, but also significant, Jemima, because it's the first time since the Second World War that a far-right party in Germany has come to this sort of level at a local election. So, and also they had the leader of the group in Thuringia has been fined twice this year for using Nazi slogans within his speech. So for the Germans, though this is not really representative of what's happening at the national level, where the AfD is not really the number one party, but is the number two party, it is seen as potentially a sort of harbinger for what is to come, particularly when you look at what has happened to the SPD, which had got basically single digits in both regions. The FDP, which runs the finance ministry, they were knocked out of the local government because they got so few votes.
Yeah. And I guess one of the big questions going forward is which other political party would be incentivized to actually work with the AfD. We're going to talk more about that later on the show. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook, thank you for the updates from the German state elections over the weekend. Stay more. There is plenty more to discuss on this show. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. A new poll suggests that Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris has erased most of Donald Trump's lead amongst likely voters in the battleground state of Michigan. The statewide Epic MRA poll of likely voters had 46% of respondents opting for Trump, while 45% backed Harris. The same poll in mid-July gave Trump a 7 percentage point lead over President Biden. And the fallout from Brazil's decision to suspend X within the country continues, with hedge fund billionaire Bill Ackman claiming the ruling will likely drive away investors and harm the country. On Friday, X was blocked by Brazil's Supreme Court after being accused of failing to deal with political misinformation. And coming up, it is the landslide that Chancellor Scholz didn't want, as populist parties on the extreme right and left take more than 60% in regional votes. We'll have more on that important story out of Germany next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Jemima Versace in Dubai, and these are the stories that set your agenda. Edging lower, Asian stocks slip as China's economy falters, with factory activity shrinking for a fourth straight month. Israel braces for a nationwide labor strike, while hundreds of thousands rally to demand a ceasefire deal after the bodies of 6 hostages were found in Gaza. Plus, a blow for Scholz, Germany's far right, set to win a regional election for the first time since World War II, as the ruling coalition is punished in the East. Let's get a check on some of these equity futures. It is a bank holiday today in the U.S., but we are coming off yet another strong session for Wall Street on Friday, with both the S&P and Nasdaq ending the day up more than 1% firmer in response to that inline PCE data, better consumer spending numbers coming through on Friday as well, propelling some of the positive recovery in risk-on assets. Overnight, however, what we are seeing is the weaker handover from some of these Asian indices. That's setting the tone. As you can see, S&P futures leaning towards the red, down about 0.1%. Nasdaq also down about 16 basis points. So over in Europe, the Euro Stoxx future looks like it's going to open up in flat territory. A lot of political news to digest as we've been talking about the elections coming through from the states in Germany, showing a big surge for the support of the far right. So we'll talk more about that with a guest in a moment. And then the FTSE 100 is the only relative bit of green that we've got on the board today. The UK index seen opening up in positive territory as well. Switching over, let's just take a look at some of the other assets on our radar this morning. And we are keeping a close eye on the euro. We have pulled back a little bit, but basically trading sideways. 110.50 is where we're at. Don't forget, we also had inline inflation data come through out of the Eurozone on Friday. Expectations building around the next ECB meeting and what the ECB do there. And as the market also prices in some of the political premium that we mentioned, the pound trading sideways at 131.33. And then Brent, the oil complex, still sitting at around $76 handle, about 0.7% weaker today, as the energy complex considers the weakening demand outlook coming out of China, the global economy, in addition to the prospect of OPEC Plus putting back more supplies to the market, more production to the market in the next couple of weeks per its slated calendar. So that it continues to exert some downward pressure on the energy complex. But let's get more on the German elections. The Chancellor Olaf Scholz's ruling coalition is set for a landslide defeat in regional votes, with a rise in populist parties on the extreme right and left. Let's go back to Bloomberg's Oliver Crook in Berlin. So we talked about the big victory that some of these populist parties saw over the weekend. What are the broader political implications of this win for the far right?
Yeah, Jumana, as you say, they won in the AfD won in Thuringia. They got second place in Saxony, and these are sort of significant moves because the AfD has never done so well on state elections. But where we sort of take a look at what the kind of the next steps are here is we begin to have a conversation about how can you actually rule, how can you govern in these regions, who will build the coalitions. There's been a sort of firewall declared by many of the mainstream parties of not to work with the AfD, which makes it really hard to collect all of the pieces to try to figure out how they would form a government. And the interesting thing there is that we've also saw the rise of the far left within these regions, the Zara Wagenknecht, which is a new political party that only began in January. They took about double digits of percentages of the vote, about 12 to 13%, which is significant. The thing that's interesting there is that it took some of the AfD's vote away, but there's also another question of, will any of the mainstream parties ever work with her? They've never done so. They've never been in a position where they have to, and they're going to have to start to look at that as a real possibility. And one of the conditions that she has put on working with any of these these governments is that explicitly they would have to back diplomatic efforts with ending the war in Ukraine, i.e. beginning to talk to Russia, which is something that a lot of the mainstream parties have entirely ruled out. Where this also becomes significant is we look at 2025 when you have federal elections within Germany. And so you have some questions about what is going to be the dynamic going in there. We have the CDU leading right now 31% of the national vote. They're likely to be the biggest party going to that. But the AfD is number 2. And there has been also, Jumana, a lot of concern that maybe at the local levels, when some of these parties can't be controlled so well, that there could actually be collaboration theoretically with potentially the CDU and the AfD. It's something that there's been a lot of debate about within Germany, so we have to see how that will evolve. And of course, the last question, Jumana, with the SPD and Scholz doing so poorly in the polls, there's a real question about the election in 2025. Is Scholz the right man to lead the SPD into those votes?
Yeah, and there indeed could be ramifications on himself as the leader of that party. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook, thank you for giving us the context. Let's continue the conversation now with Sudha David-Wilp, Berlin Office Director of the German Marshal Fund. Let me just ask you your take on these regional elections. Very interesting developments, and perhaps no surprise really that we have seen so much support pop up for these far-right parties. Is it going to have any ramifications on Scholz's actual ability to govern?
Good morning, Jumana. So the government in Berlin has been bracing for these state elections, but now that the results are in, I think it has been, or it is a blow for Scholz's government, the three-way tie-up between the center-left SPD, the Greens, and the Free Democrats. They barely made it into the state legislatures, the SPD. The Greens only made it into one state, and the FDP didn't make the 5% threshold. So there is going to be talk in Berlin about how long this coalition will hold. But right now, there's no motivation for any party to pull out because the favorability ratings for the government are just incredibly low in Germany at the moment.
What does it tell you about the German public and the fact that both of the parties that did well over this weekend, even though we're talking about the right and the left, there are two common denominators. They're both anti-immigration and they're also anti-giving further military support to Ukraine. What does that tell you about the mood on the ground for the German public?
That's correct, Jemana. There's a lot of overlap between these two parties, these two fringe parties that did incredibly well in the state elections, but they are on opposite sides of the spectrum. So in Berlin, you can perhaps say the success is more pronounced because these two states are located in what was once East Germany. And you can look at factors like a lack of political party identification, the rapid economic transformation over the past 3 decades, and as well as sympathy toward Russia. But I don't think Berlin can ignore the results because many of the themes that played out, this concern over migration, the concern over inflation, and the concern about escalation with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine are also being played out all over Germany and will accompany the federal government into next year's campaign.
Yeah, I wonder if Scholz is keeping a close eye on the developments in France, because, of course, after the European elections there and the big win for some of the parties on the right, Macron took that very self-destructive decision to call for snap elections, which is why the country's in the situation it's in right now. I do wonder if Scholz himself may be pushed into a situation where he has to call elections sooner than the slated date, which is next September.
Germany is a country that really cherishes stability, and Chancellor Scholz is very risk averse, kind of like his predecessor, Chancellor Merkel. It would be very difficult for snap elections to occur in Germany so quickly. There are many hurdles, and also the president of Germany, Steinmeier, has already said that there has to be a very high bar for him to allow snap elections in Germany. And at a time where there's much instability in Europe, as you mentioned, there's a vacuum in political leadership in France. Germany would be well advised to think about when an election should occur as the EU moves forward for its new 5-year legislature term with von der Leyen.
And going back to the coalition itself, we're talking about SDP, but what about FDP, the Greens parties as well? Also, really not a good showing there as far as the regional elections are concerned. How do they regain momentum over the course of the next 12 months?
The results of the state elections have been a setback for Chancellor Scholz and his two partners, the Greens and the FDP, but it's also a cause of concern for the CDU. At the end of the day, there's much more party fragmentation in the political system here in Germany, and it's getting very difficult to form viable coalitions. We'll be seeing that in the next few weeks in the 2 state elections, and we're probably going to see that next year as well. So for the Greens, there is a chance to perhaps still increase its popularity within Germany. The SPD and the Greens have historically not done very well in the former East Germany, and the FDP as well. But there is still time, but it will be quite difficult for the Traffic Coalition to perhaps enter a second term. And we're looking at all kinds of possible tie-ups next year after the federal election here in Germany.
Yeah, I guess the clue was in the name, the Traffic Light Coalition, when it was formed several years ago. Sudha, David-Wilp, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. Berlin Office Director of the German Marshal Fund. Coming up, how AI could improve the way small businesses manage everyday payments. We'll speak to the Chief Executive of Accounting Software from XERO. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. The UK's private equity industry has offered to support some of the government's proposed plans to remove a tax break. Our UK finance team leader, Jenny Sering, joins me now. So first of all, just talk us through what the government is potentially looking to do that's had private equity firms so worried recently.
So there's a couple of different possibilities this could take, but I guess the broad goal for Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Chancellor Rachel Reeves is how they've put it is kind of putting more of the weight on folks with the broadest shoulders. And so they've really looked to do a couple of different things, whether it's change the tax rate that is applied to carried interest, which is a really key part of the way that a lot of deal makers here in the UK have long been, made their money. Or they've also proposed some smaller changes. And I think all of the, confusion and maybe lack of clarity has really had the entire private equity industry on edge for several months now.
But it seems to me that they're coming up with some sort of a mechanism that will make us a handful of these private equity firms actually come around and offer support for the measures being proposed. So walk us through those.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what we had over the weekend was on Saturday was the deadline for different industry players or folks that might have a view on what the government is proposing to submit their views. And so we started to hear from some of the biggest lobbyists and trade groups representing the industry. And it was actually surprising because as much worry and angst as we've heard from them these past few months, they actually said, as long as some of these measures are only applied going forward, that is, they won't be applied to funds that have already been raised in the past and contracts and deals that have already been worked out in the past, then this actually could work. And so I think it's a pretty big and key win for Chancellor Rachel Reeves as she looks to kind of balance the budget and come up with those plans for October. The government has said that, some of these moves in terms of raising the tax rate on carried interest could actually raise about £565 million every year. And so I think that's a really key piece of, what they're trying to do, that they've already gotten some support from the industry is a really good sign.
Yeah, it is a good sign. But at the same time, let's talk bigger picture. Raising interest on carried interest is talks of raising taxes on carried interest, I should say, in addition to potentially other tax-raising measures. There's been lots of commentary about how these moves could actually hurt London's competitiveness and make places like Dubai, which is where I am, Milan, more attractive financial centers. Is that something that this Starmer government is worried about?
I think so. So they bring it up in almost, every press conference or every news announcement that they make, that really everything that they're doing is meant to have that eye towards the attractiveness and competitiveness of London as a financial center. I do think some of the different private equity firms that have kind of come out, either against this or wanting to have more information have warned that, if you end up taxing the way that these funds are structured in such a penalty way, you will drive them away. That's yet to be seen. We haven't actually seen anybody, pack their bags and head to the sunny shores of Dubai, as it were. But it's definitely something that I think Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, and all of the lawmakers that are kind of contemplating how they want to carry this out are really keeping in mind.
Bloomberg UK finance team leader Jenny Sering, thank you so much for that overview. Let's turn our focus now to tax challenges for small businesses and how AI could improve the way they manage payments. Joining me now is Skhinder Singh Cassidy, Chief Executive of accounting software firm XERO. Good to have you with us. So maybe just walk us through Some of the growth plans that you put in place, you've been CEO for more than a year now. How are these plans looking to generate growth?
Well, I think we're really excited at XERO to have many opportunities to grow our platform for small businesses. And at the center of them are three large markets, the UK, the US, and of course, Australia, where we have long been a flagship player, and really three critical jobs where we see expansion of our opportunity with small businesses. That's core accounting, payroll, and payments. And we alluded, I know, earlier to the importance of payments, both getting paid and making payments for small businesses, which is another area of expansion for us at XERO.
Yeah, and you're primarily dealing with SMEs, so small, medium enterprises. And I just wonder if the landscape significantly changed or has structurally changed following on from COVID. And during the times of COVID, we spoke about the cash flow issues, the liquidity issues many of these SMEs face. Are you still seeing those issues today?
Yes, we are. Look, as you know, COVID was a very difficult time for SMEs, but it also resulted in unprecedented starting of new businesses. And that's really, I would say the entrepreneurial flavor is kind of restaurants and everything shut down. Many people actually started businesses in new ways. But the persistent issue pre-COVID and now post-COVID is really late payments. Many small businesses struggle to get paid, often by larger businesses. And so cash flow continues to be an issue that we see through our data in every market that we serve. And we serve over 180 countries across the world and 8 larger markets. So we continue to see late payments be an issue. And that's a place where we believe governments really need to support big businesses paying small businesses on time.
Yeah, well, it's certainly an issue in the UK as well. We were just speaking to my colleague about some of the potential measures that the UK government is looking to implement. To what extent do you think legislation can help spur growth for SMEs?
I think legislation certainly can. Historically, the digitization of software, whether that's taxes, whether that's e-invoicing, or even upskilling, encouraging schemes that encourage the digitalization and I would say tech upskilling of SMEs, all have proven benefits to their productivity. Now, late payments is something that we see both the older government and the new government looking to embrace. And we think that, too, really could use a push from government.
I want to ask you about the main topic of the du jour and the year, and that is AI and your own AI strategy, and just how you think about the amount of money that you want to invest going into artificial intelligence versus the likely return on investment that you're going to get in an environment, of course, where you've got to keep costs under check. How do you think about the payoff?
Yes, sure. Well, first of all, XERO has long been a platform that has embraced machine learning. If you think about the platform we offer today, anything from bank reconciliation, where we offer auto categorization of expenses, or things like scanning in your bills, are things that have historically required AI. And so we've been a big investor in AI throughout our history. Now, I think what you're talking about is generative AI, of course, and the ability to really automate tasks, whether that's through a conversational agent or a more sophisticated AI agent. And we do see the opportunity there as giving back so much time and efficiency that we do believe it is essential to our platform to include features from simple to more complex. Thus, we announced earlier this year JAX, Just Ask XERO, which is our own AI agent, and its first instantiation has just launched into beta, and it in fact helps small businesses raise invoices on our platform, on platforms like through email, through WhatsApp, and also right on XERO.com in an automated way, trying to tackle that late payments issue and get cash flowing faster using generative AI.
So already seeing the efficiency gains there. Skhinder,
Absolutely.
Great to chat to you. Thank you so much for coming on our show and for staying up late for us. Skhinder Singh, Cassidy, Chief Executive of XERO. Now, plenty more coming up. Stay with us. So we're going to take a look at some of the key data to watch in the week ahead. Today, of course, is a U.S. bank holiday. We'll be right back in a few moments. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Well, we're keeping a close eye on developments in the Middle East, with some lines coming through now that the Israeli government is petitioning the court to block the labor union strike that is set to take place today. And of course, this all erupted over the course of the last 24 hours, with Israel's largest labor union calling for strikes, demonstrations in the country in protest over the developments of the weekend and the fact that 6 hostages were found dead in a Gaza tunnel. It looks as though the Israeli government now is petitioning to the court to actually block that union strike from going ahead. Now, elsewhere in markets, we've got another big week coming up. The main event is going to be on Friday with the jobs data. So we're going to look ahead to that. That comes up on Friday. And of course, that is in addition to the JOLTS data that comes through on Wednesday. Thursday, ADP, but the big one for markets will be the NFP, not just the headline print, but that unemployment rate figure as well, whether that rate will continue to tick up again. A big miss to the downside would mean that perhaps a 50 basis point cut could be set in stone for September. So it's going to be a pivotal one to watch. But more detail on these jobs figures, because as you can see from the next chart, the trend has been one of sequential lower and lower headline figures. And you can see it right there. We've got the NFP, that is the green bar, continues to trend lower, and the private figures are also trending lower month to month. So it's quite clear when you just look at it panning out of the last couple of months, in the last 3 months, the data has been drifting lower and lower. Where is it going to form? Where is it going to base out? That is the big question for markets. And also bear in mind, the BLS also revised downwards a lot of those employment numbers over the course of the last year too. So the actual true figure is lower than what we thought it was before. And then finally, a quick glance at what is priced in for these subsequent Fed meetings. More than 30 basis points priced in at each one of these meetings, 100 basis points by the end of this year, 200 basis points by the end of 2025. Will those come good? That's a big question for markets, and one certainly that we're going to be paying close attention to. But that is it for Daybreak Europe. Stay with us because the opening trade is coming up next. This is Bloomberg.